Okay then, let's talk about SD3. I'm going to cover only the technical side of things. I'm not interested in the politics or internet drama, but at the end I will add a few notes about the SD3 license agreement. So from an academic standpoint, I'm really excited about SD3 because the technology is very interesting. Unfortunately, the way it has been implemented leaves something to be desired. But let's start from analyzing the workflow. Technically, you can load the default workflow, select the SD3 checkpoint and generate. There's no need for dedicated nodes. ConfUI is smart enough to configure itself to use SD3. There are a few things you need to be aware of though. First, the checkpoint. There are a few options. In this case, I selected the container that includes all three text encoder, the two clips that we all know from SDXL, and the text-to-text transfer transformer, or T5. Here I'm using the FP16 version. FP stands for floating point, and 16 is basically the resolution. It's like drawing a line with pixels. The higher the resolution, the smoother the line will look. From my test, I noticed a small but important difference from 8 to 16 bits, so I tend to use the latter. Next, the empty latent image. There is an empty SD3 latent image node. At the moment, I don't think there's any actual use of it. It will be probably useful in the future if you need to do some operation over the latent, like noise injection, for example. But if you go straight to the K-sampler using either the base or the SD3 empty latent, is exactly the same. Let me prove it to you. I'll connect the new node, generate again, and the result will be identical. The only thing to remember is that the latent dimensions should be a multiple of 64. Another important thing to know is that SD3 doesn't work with stochastic samplers, so any ancestral or SD sampler won't work. Euler and DPM++2M are fine, also DDIM, UniPC, and a few others. For the scheduler, only normal, SGM, uniform, and simple seems to work, but I haven't tested all the combinations, so feel free to experiment. Personally, I stick with SGM uniform. Next, the negative prompt. As you can see, it's empty. SD3 doesn't like negative embeds, so when in doubt, just don't use them. But there's a way to take advantage of the negative prompt too. This is shown in the example workflow in the Hugging Face repository. Let me replicate it here. I need a conditioning 0 out and two conditioning set time step nodes. In the first one, I set the start at point 1 and leave the end at 1. In the second, I leave the start at 0 and set the end at point 1. Now I connect the 0 out to the first range and the negative prompt to the second. The 0 out node effectively nullifies any conditioning. It's like using a completely empty embed, no matter what is in the text prompt. With these nodes, we are basically sending the negative embeds only at the beginning of the generation, from 0 to 10%. And from 10% to the end, we simply ignore any negative, which is what SD3 prefers. All we need to do now is to combine them and send them to the K-sampler. This is a small trick to take advantage of the negative prompt without interfering too much with SD3 sampling. Of course, you can play with these numbers. For example, if you want to send the negative embeds up to the 20% of the generation, you can set the start here at point 2 and the end here at point 2, and now the negatives will have a stronger impact. This is all good, but a bit tedious to use, so I made an SD3 negative conditioning node that basically takes care of everything. I can delete all these nodes and connect the negative prompt to it. Now you can experiment with different values very quickly. And if you set it to 0, it will be like sending no negative at all. A nice trick is to set the negative conditioning to the lowest value, 0.001. That will basically use the embeds only in the first step, which is also the most important. That's all fine and dandy, but there's a caveat, and it's a big one. The way SD3 is trained, it doesn't really follow negatives very well. I have prepared this workflow. In the prompt I have a woman walking on the beach at sunset and no negatives. The result is mostly white women with blonde or light brown hair. In the positive I haven't specified the ethnicity or the color of the hair, so in the negative I can try to add blonde and see if it works. Now I should get a brunette. It also changed the ethnicity a little, but it seems to be working. Let me also add Asian and flowers. Okay, perfect. Now I'm adding a few of the classic negatives, distorted, malformed, ugly, ill, bad hands, and so on. And also I don't want any jewelry. I'm making 4 images because one is barely representative. Okay, it appears to be working, but if I remove the important keywords from the negative, blonde, Asian, flowers and jewels, and generate again, well, there are still no flowers, no necklace, and just one of them is blonde. I made dozens of these tests on any sort of subject, and the result is more or less the same. Negative embeds have a very low value. Strong concepts like blonde or Asian seem to work, but vague words like artifacts or distorted have the same effect as gibberish. Make your own experiments and let me know how it goes. This is not gospel, but my suggestion is to either use no negative at all or use no more than 3 or 4 very targeted keywords. Adding more will just dilute them and burn the image. Maybe someone at Stability can chime in and tell me why some words seem to work, or maybe it's just placebo. Okay, there's one last node that we need to cover, which is model sampling SD3. This goes in the model pipeline and it's defaulted to 3.0. If we check the official paper, we see that the shift is a value used in both training and sampling. Stability AI ran some tests and established that a value of 3 is ideal and higher values don't give a noticeable benefit. What I've seen is that lower values tend to make the composition messier and higher value tidier. But anyway, 3 is not written in stone and you can play with it. So now that we have all the elements to make an SD3 generation, let's address the elephant in the room, or better, the woman on the grass. Here I prompt a simple and apparently innocent scene of a woman lying on the grass. If I generate, you know what is gonna happen. Ah, beautiful. This is not because SD3 is not able of doing this subject, but because of the heavy censorship and weird training. The community theorized that there might be some attention layers that trigger the censorship, and by sending arbitrary data to those layers, we might be able to bypass the image scrambling. I asked directly to Comfy Anonymous, who also worked on the training of the 4B large model. He very unceremoniously says that there's no trigger layer, but it's just how the 2B medium model was trained. So back to our monster. If I scroll through a few seeds, you will see that some of them are not actually too bad. Okay, we said that SD3 likes a latent size that is a multiple of 64. Well, let's confuse the little bastard and set the resolution to 1040 by 1040. This is not something you should normally do, but indulge me. Boom, it worked. This little trick seems enough to fool the model. The hair looks a bit messy. Let me try to add messy to the negatives. And it seems to be working, right? Now I replace messy with 5 A's. And basically the result is the same. So as we said before, negative is mostly noise. If we check the previous seed, we should get far less monsters. Okay, this is still bad. Let's try to change the resolution to 1048 by 1048. And yeah, it worked. This is of course a hack. The better way would be to just avoid sensitive material. And since at Stability AI they only do the missionary, that means removing line from the prompt. Let me set the resolution back to 1024 and generate. Now everything's safe and I get this nice lady floating over the ground. To try to improve it further, I can use the dedicated clip text encoder SD3. This node splits the prompt into 3 text encoders, clip L, G, and T5. I can use the same prompt in all of them, but in the second I reintroduce line on the grass. I connect the pipes. I'm also lowering the CFG to 3.5 because the image looks burned already. And actually, since the hair causes a little of hallucination, in the second text prompt I'm also adding red short hair. Okay, let's give it a go. Well, now she is less floating and more carried by ants, but yeah, much better if you remember where we started from. Now, don't get me wrong, even this configuration won't give you 100% good results. And I understand that this is a new model and we need to understand how to prompt it, but here we are not learning how to prompt. This is just hacking a broken training. Anyway, SD3 has a lot of good things to offer. We just have to consider this version as a pre-release demo. So, first of all, adhesion to the prompt is pretty good. In this image I prompt a Japanese young woman waving green and blue hair, leather jacket, pink top with white bunny, and downtown Tokyo. The result is not perfect, but it's pretty darn close to what I asked. If I generate 4 of them, I will probably get some weird hands, but overall the scene will be faithful to the prompt. One thing to notice is the negatives. I just added noise until I found the result that I wanted. If I remove everything and generate again, I get this thing. As we saw before, some keywords in the negative seem to have an actual impact in the generation, so let's try with bad hands. Yeah, you might think that it worked, but if I remove bad and leave only hands, yeah, it still works. So don't rely too much on the negative embeds. Okay, how to prompt. Someone suggested that you have to talk to SD3 like whispering to a lover. I say talk to SD3 like the bitch she is. I made a test using just keywords instead of discursive prompt, and apart from the wrong hand, the result is more or less the same. So my strategy is prompt the most difficult part to generate at the very beginning, in this case waving and green-blue hair. Write as you'd speak normally, but contrary to what is suggested, don't be overly descriptive. Go straight to the point using well-selected keywords. Next, add the easier-to-do details, like the leather jacket, the pink top, and the headphones. Then the background. I noticed that SD3 is pretty good at background, so you can be rather descriptive here. At the end, you can add a few keywords to try to steer the composition and the colors. In this case, I put joyful and funny. And that's pretty much it. Remember, this is just the first pass of a base model. Adding a second pass, detailers, upscalers, of course things would get better. But as a first pass, this is pretty good. Again, these are just some suggestions to get you started, experiment and get back with your findings. Another thing that I like is how SD3 handles noise, especially in the small details. I've made this scene with trees, and if I zoom in, the leaves are very well defined. There's very little hallucination. Also the bushes, they are very far but still well defined. If we go farther in the trees in the background, you can still see the branches, and the model fingerprint is less obvious than, say, SDXL. If you look at a similar scene generated with Realistic Vision XL, when I zoom in, you can see this spongy kind of texture that the model adds when there are too many small details. I made this other image. It's not very realistic, looks a bit meta-human, but if I zoom in the lips, for example, the texture is natural, and the knitting on the sweater is incredibly convincing with very little hallucination. All this just to say that I can see huge potential here, we just need to unlock it. Another interesting aspect is that SD3 seems able to work at pretty high resolutions. I don't recommend it, but here I worked at 1024 by 1728, which is the maximum size I could reach without aberration. The trick is to use very low CFG, no negative, and play with the shift. In this case, I set it to 6. The image is pretty good with only a very little distortion here on the grass, and a second pass actually got rid of that. This is another scene at 1728 by 1024. Again, very low CFG. This time I also added a rescale CFG node, because why not? And the shift is 1. Just to prove that 3 is not always your best option. If I set it back to 3, you'll see that the image won't be as good. Okay, one last thing. Control nets. Instant X, the guys under Instant ID, released 3 control nets for SD3 already. Canny, Pose and Tile. And they are pretty good already, considering how quickly they released them. SD3 seems to react very well to control nets, so there's still hope. At the moment, ComfUI doesn't support them, but I made a few tests with diffusers and the results are encouraging. These hands are made with Canny, for example. You need to be very descriptive in the text prompt, but they came out great. Also, the pose control net is pretty nice. I tried this complex pose and the model somehow managed. The tile control net maybe is the weakest of the lot. This image is generated from an empty latent, so no image to image. The reference is at a resolution of 256 by 256, and the latent is 1024 by 1024. The model is not multi-resolution, unfortunately, so at the moment that's the best we can do. Okie dokie, let's talk about the SD3 license. I'm not here to give you my opinion because I'm not qualified. It's important that the community stays vigilant and calls out all corporate BS. And as it is now, the license is worded really badly. But anyway, Alex McMonkey, who is an engineer at Stability AI, already said, "The people in charge of that stuff are aware it's communicated wrong, have confirmed internally that it wasn't intended that way, and are working on plans to fix the communication on it." Of course, it's not enough to post a message on Discord. Stability AI has to update the actual terms of service on their website, but they seem to have acknowledged the problem, so put the pitchfork in the closet for now and let's see how things evolve in the coming days. The problem here is that the SD3 medium is a limited and weirdly trained model. It shows great potential and can do nice things already, but it's far from being really usable. Well, I hope this video was interesting and helped you understand how SD3 actually works. If you can't run SD3 locally, the good friends at OpenArt are offering limited free generations so you can get a glimpse of what to expect. I'll leave the link in the description and it's not sponsored. Okay then, that's enough for today. See you next time. Ciao!